we've got the Médoc, which is in Bordeaux, right? We all know this. And this is at 45 degrees north latitude. It is between the Atlantic Ocean and the Gironde estuary. The Gironde estuary is an estuary is where two rivers meet and they form this area that flows out to the ocean. So you have two rivers in the north side, or the sort of eastern side. You have the Dordogne River, which is coming out of the Massif Central in the middle of France. And then you have the Garonne. The Garonne River is coming out of the Pyrenees. And because of that, you're going to have some effect of runoff and soil types from the Pyrenees. Now, all of this business about left and right bank, which we see, comes from this river. We're talking about river banks. And as you are floating along on a river and heading out towards the Atlantic, on the right side of the river is the right bank. So in this case, we really are talking about Saint-Julien, Pomerol, Lalande, Pomerol, all of these areas, also Bourg and Blaye. And then you have the left bank. The left bank would include Grave and Pessac-Léognan, even Sauternes. And then as you go up on the estuary itself is the Médoc, okay? So in this area, this large area is Entrée du Mer, the area between two seas, which is really between two rivers, but we're not gonna get technical here. That is a lot of pasture land, and it's a lot of basic everyday Bordeaux AOC wine. So we don't have a lot there. But what we are talking about is this very special area that makes up 15% of the entire area of Bordeaux. It is about 40,000 acres or 16,200 hectares. We're not talking about all of Bordeaux. We are focusing in on one very specific area. There are 8 appellations. Again, I shouldn't have gone so quickly away from it. 8 appellations here. We have 2 regional appellations. So things that would encompass the other appellations, that would be Médoc. Everything could be called Médoc if you wanted it to be, just like actually everything could be called Bordeaux or Bordeaux Superior also if it met those criteria. But this would be Médoc. So you could put all of these wines in a wine from the Médoc, but you wouldn't want to do that because you wouldn't really get the money for it, and that would be great. And then there's the Haut Médoc, which is in sort of areas in the interstitials around these other 6 communes, and has some really fine wines as well. Médoc is a lot of more everyday wines. Haut Médoc has some very fine wines as well. But these 8 or 6 communes are the ones that are really the stars of the show in some ways. And we have, as we covered last week, Saint-Eustache and Pauillac. And this week we are going from south to north. So we're going to do Margaux, Moulis, Listrac, and Saint Julien. And these areas, just so you get a sense of how much wine we're talking about here, we're talking about 8.3 million cases of wine, 100 million bottles. Now that might sound like a lot, but I want you to consider that Yellowtail alone makes 8.3 million cases, just one brand. And Barefoot, which is the largest wine brand in the world, I've seen some estimates up to 21 million. So we are talking about, for this very esteemed area, a finite amount of wine, not too little, but not too much either. The climate of the Médoc, of course, we are on the water. So we're talking about a place that is a maritime climate. It's warmed by the Gulf Stream. It is like a natural air conditioning system that flows over the Médoc. You have some protection in the west from the Landis forest, which is a pine forest that's sort of man-made there. There are so many, though, mesoclimates. So there's the climate, then there's the mesoclimate. The mesoclimate is like, what's that specific area like? And then you have the microclimate, that's within the vine. So people often mess up meso and microclimate. I know I have done that for a very long time, but meso is really what we're talking about here. You have warmth. You have warm summers, but you can also have dampness. Anybody that is from, the water, I mean, I grew up on Long Island, you all know that. So it is damp and it's humid. And so, yeah, you can get rot and mold and things like that, but that Gulf Stream and that airflow is really going to help, especially along the Gironde. You have also warmth in the wintertime. So the areas that are closer to the Gironde are going to have less frost risk. That's good. I guess the whole point, though, is that when you live near an ocean that is prone to making some trouble, some weather, you have an issue with every year it being different. And we all know that that translates directly to one thing on the bottle, and that is the vintage, right? So the number on the bottle is the vintage, and the reason it's there is to tell you what happened that year, or so that you can be reminded or go seek out what happened that year. And in Bordeaux, we don't know what's going to happen. Have there been great years? Yes. We'll get the vintages out of the way now. 2005, 6, 9 in the Médoc, right? 10, 15, and a lot of the 5 years always do well. 20 did very well too. 2016, 2018. We are looking at a bunch of really great vintages. Does it matter where you are in the Médoc? It absolutely does. Because if you listen to the podcast with Chateau Menet and Anne-Lenore, she will tell you that Saint-Estèphe often has really great years where people in Margaux do not. So again, all of that is going to matter. The sort of landscape or the idea about the Médoc is that, and I think, as I was thinking about why is the Médoc not a place where we talk about terroir all the time? Yeah, it's like fancy chateau. And I have said this to many of you. It's not so much about Bordeaux or the Médoc being a snotty place itself, although there are some really fancy chateaux and aristocrats owned it, and some fancy people own it. A lot of it has to do with the people that drink the wine and like to talk about the fact that they drink the wine, right? So that can be kind of off-putting to us. We don't need to worry about that though. Médoc often doesn't focus on one of its biggest strengths, which is its terroir. Now, what it doesn't have, and strangely for Europe, what it doesn't have is slopes. The highest point in the Médoc is 141 feet or 43 meters in Listrac, which we're going to talk about. What is really kind of the star player here, though, is that, yes, there's some undulation, there's some ups and downs and things like that. But the thing that is really amazing about the Médoc is the different types of soils, not just the different types of soils, even the different types of gravels that we get into. So gravel, right? We have that. I talked about the Dordogne coming out of the Pyrenees Mountains. Well, we have Pyrenees gravel that washed down, right? That erosion washed down, and we have some alluvial stuff and some sand, and that's going to play a big part here. We also have stuff just from the Gironde, so things that came a little bit further on, not all the way from the Pyrenees. That's going to be a different kind of gravel. And what we have on the left bank in the Médoc is these kind of terraces, these big mounds, these level mounds of gravel, which were more or less revealed when the Dutch drained the swamps in the 1600s. And if you want to know more about the history, go back and listen to part 1, because we're not going to cover history except as it pertains to these communes. But when the Dutch drained the marshland here, then we saw the gravel, and that is when things really started cooking here. But the thing is, it's not all gravel, okay? There is some clay here, less actually in these communes than last week, the ones we discussed last week, but there's also limestone. I feel like that's something that we miss a lot when we think about Bordeaux. There's clay limestone here. Could whites do well here? Sure, they could. They absolutely could, because you have limestone, which often gives wines a sense of freshness, brightness. It's going to give them elegance. So yes, you can do some really great stuff here. Now, unfortunately, the Médoc does not allow any white wines to be made under the Médoc banner, but you can get those wines that are called Bordeaux or Bordeaux Supérieur, and those are very good. I think it was in the podcast with Edouard Miai, we're from Chateau Siron, which we'll talk about later, where we were talking about, could they do a white Médoc appellation? And I think they are thinking about that. Makes perfect sense when you consider there's limestone bedrock here. Absolutely. So the other thing is that these different types of soils are going to allow you to grow different stuff, for lack of a better word. We'll show you the pretty pictures here of, sorry, I didn't show you the specific parts of the Médoc. You're going to see this map a ton, though. We don't need to go over it again, but look, different, relatively flat. To give you an idea, Burgundy, I taught the class on Burgundy last weekend. Burgundy starts at around 200 meters. For Americans, that's about 650 feet and goes up to about 1,300 feet or 400 meters. Starts there. Our highest point here is 141 feet. So we are talking about very low-lying areas that are near the Gironde, the estuary. And so we don't have a lot of, except for a little bit of undulation, lots of slopes, but we have, look at this, the gravel, the clay limestone, beautiful stuff here. And then we have the grapes. The four that are used in the Médoc most, and you are allowed to use Malbec and Carmenere, and there are a few other accessory grapes, as they call them. The four that are big are Cabernet Sauvignon, because it does so well on the gravel. Merlot does well on that clay limestone. Cabernet Franc also does well on clay limestone, those cooler soils. And Petit Verdot, which is also a gravel lover. But the combination of these four grapes makes wines that are so interesting, that are so different, that are so exciting. And depending on what commune you're in, you will use different proportions depending on the year. These wines, these grapes, as they grow, are an agricultural hedge. So what does that mean? It means if you have a crappy year and your Merlot ripens early and things do not go well for you, you still have a shot with Cabernet and Petit Verdot, and that is good in a place that's got bad weather, right? So you've got choice, which is great. Also, different terroir. So it's not all uniform. So great. Now you've got a place for your Merlot and you've got a place for your Cab, and you can blend these things together and it can go really, really well. You get unique wines. The wines almost are reflections of the terroir of the chateau. So in order to put the chateau name on the bottle, and it will say Miss in Bouteille in Chateau, I'm sorry for my bad French, but you'll see it on your label. It was bottled at the chateau. All those grapes come from there. They're not buying things from outside. That's not how this works. So you know that that's the microclimate. That's the terroir. And terroir is not just soil, right? Which is just, as I said last time, that drives me crazy. It's not just soil. It's also things like the hand of man, the history, what grows best in their particular area. What are they going to do with these grapes? That's all part of it too. So we have lighter styles, we have heavier styles. Winemaking is a combination of tradition and technology. Again, you look at these labels and you might think to yourself, oh my gosh, these are like old and stodgy and they just have the name of the chateau and it's like whatever. No, Bordeaux is responsible for so much innovation. All that stuff, or much of that stuff that you see in Napa and Sonoma and New World wines, is coming out of Bordeaux. They are pioneering so many interesting technologies. They're pioneering things in the vineyards. They have done the work and they continue to do the work, and they're never resting on their laurels, at least not nowadays. So, they do oak aging because Cabernet Sauvignon really does need that, but never more than 35 or 40%, usually more like 30%. And they're backing off of that. They are about terroir-based wines now. It's an exciting time to learn about the Médoc, because now is the time when people really are starting to care about the land and about the things that really matter, I think, in wine. And we're moving away from, who drank that in your neighborhood, so you have to have that, because who cares, right? They are not you. So we'll go through that quickly, because we're going to talk about it again, and then I want to get to our main event. The classification, I'll remind you of the 1855 classification. Yes, it happened a very long time ago. Napoleon II was the emperor. He decided that he wanted, for his universal exposition in Paris, for the agricultural section, because remember, wine is farming, that he wanted a list of the best wines in Bordeaux, but went to the Chamber of Commerce and they just gave him a list after there's lots of machinations, but gave him a list of things that were the highest priced. Now, there are many reasons, I just want to be clear, why certain chateaux were not part of the 1855 classification, even though they garnered the same prices. Some of it has to do with, there were a lot of people that were anti-Napoleon II, so they did not want any part of it. Some of it was that they were overlooked, they didn't have connections, and others are, they didn't belong there. So the 1855 classification is a weird thing. They rank chateau, from the first Premier Grand Cru Classé. We have second growth, third growth, fourth growth, and fifth growth. And then after that, there was a price break, and they don't have that. 61 chateaux were classified, and many of them were in actually Margaux and Saint Julien. Okay, so that's an important thing. Cru Bourgeois, The other major one, and you may see that on the back of your bottle, this little thing here, which is really kind of an important marker to look for. This has been around, this classification has been around since the Middle Ages. It's wines that are from the Médoc that are not in the 1855 classification. Again, this has been used since the Middle Ages, but we have 3 levels since the 2018 change: Cru Bourgeois, Cru Bourgeois Supérieur, and Cru Bourgeois Exceptionnel. Now, these wines there's 149 Cru Bourgeois, or 179 rather. These are Chateau, not just individual wines like they used to be, 56 Supérieur and 14 Exceptionnel. And these wines are excellent quality, and they are not in the 1855 classification. So look out for them. The prices are pretty good. And then we have the Cru Artisan, and this again has been around forever. 36 of them reclassified every 5 years, just allowed by the European Union in 1994. Okay, so that is our quick tour back through Bordeaux, back through the Médoc, and now we're going to get to Margaux. I want to spend the rest of the time talking about these 4 communes because they are so important and they are so very different. And I think that, you know, if you don't have the wines tonight, all 4 of them, I wouldn't expect that everybody has all 4 of them, but go back and try them. Because let's begin with Margaux. Margaux is, again, we'll go back to the dorky maps here just to get an orientation of where we are. Margaux is the southernmost commune appellation. Okay, so Margaux is down here. It is southern. It is the largest of all of the communes. It covers 5 different villages: Cantenac, Labarde, Margaux, Susan, and Arsac. And the interesting thing about Margaux is that the parcels are not contiguous. So a lot of times people will own things that are near the river, and then they will own things that are farther inland. They will own things in the north. They'll own things in the south. Now, this is where things get confusing. The area that is allowed to be called Margaux has been contested more than anybody in the Médoc. They have gone back and forth. So there are some people that feel that there are certain communes that are not good enough to be called Margaux. And since Margaux has so much status, this is really big business. But since 2007, it's been all quiet on that front. Thank goodness for our friend Edouard Miai from Chateau Siron, who I asked about this in the podcast with him. It's a fantastic podcast. I adore him. He's so much fun. So please go back and listen to that if you haven't. He really gives a good overview of Margaux. He is the head of the syndicate, the appellation. So Margaux is famous because the first growth, those Grand Cru, there are 5 of them, is Chateau Margaux. And Chateau Margaux carried the name of the appellation forward. So when people hear Margaux, they think a famous wine, a good wine, right? But the real secret, and again, this is covered in that podcast with Chateau Siron, is that super, super interesting that Margaux went through a very, very, very bad period of time. Okay, where until about from the 1950s until the 1990s, it was not great wine. So I'm going to talk about that in a second, but let's just give the stats, the lay of the land here. This is the largest commune, like I said, 9% of vineyard land, 3,700 acres, 1,500 hectares. We have 9 million bottles, or about 750,000 cases. For the Médoc, that's pretty big, right? Really, that's the average production. You have 65 winemakers, or 65 wine, entities. And the interesting thing is that 21 of them are Cru Classé in 1855. They're part of that 1855 classification. 1/3 of all of the 1855 classification is in Margaux. So these are a lot of heavy hitters. You have also 10 Cru Bourgeois, 4 Cru Artisan, and then 30 other growers. You have 1 first growth, that's going to make a big difference. You have 5 second growths, and then a lot more in all of the other categories. The breakdown of grapes here is 53% Cabernet Sauvignon and 40% Merlot, with 4% Petit Verdot and 3% Cabernet Franc. Now, again, this is an interesting thing because we don't have as much Cabernet as we'll see later in Saint Julien, or as we saw in Pauillac. Merlot does quite well in some of these clayey limestone areas, and that makes these wines soft and elegant and beautiful, as we're going to taste in a second. So that Petit Verdot also, a little bit of Petit Verdot goes a very long way here into making these wines floral and rich, but still adding some backbone, adding some tannin, adding something that's going to make these wines special and give them some longevity. Now, vines have been in Margaux since the Gallo-Roman times. The name comes from the Latin. Now, nothing happened of really a lot of importance here, though, until the Dutch drained the swamps in the 1600s. But it went real quick after that, because the bourgeoisie came in, the aristocrats came in, and they settled this land. They set up all of these chateaux, and by 1760, the chateau and the vineyards that you see today were already established. Not much has changed in Margaux since 1760. That is really quite miraculous. Certain spots were revered. Famous people really liked this wine. Our friend TJ, Thomas Jefferson, loved Chateau Margaux, ordered a bunch of cases of it along with everything else, bankrupting our treasury. Thank you very much, TJ. But he had his priorities, and I got to give him credit for it, right? Then we also had Ernest Hemingway giving his daughter the name Margaux because of this appellation. Again, good priorities. He liked his wine. So the problem, though, for Margaux is that, yes, it had all of this fame, but after World War I, the Depression, World War II, we had a lot of general poverty here and lots of abandoned vineyards. People were not interested in farming this area. In 1954, they finally got their appellation. That is nearly 20 years after Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, and Saint Julien. Okay, so this was the laggard of these communal appellations, which is crazy because it's so famed now. But they bounced back, and that's mostly due to Gonzague Lurton, who, again, we talked about in the podcast with Chateau Sirron, who helped revitalize the area. It's exciting that this happened, but it wasn't until the 1990s. So we are seeing the fruits of that labor come to light now. Now, of course, the chateaux that were famed were already famed, but I'm talking about the ones that maybe we can afford, like the things that are, yes, they're expensive, but they're $40 instead of $400, like Chateau Palmer, or all of the other growths that are here in Margaux. So Margaux, again, just to take a quick peek here, what we have, we're on the Gironde. We are sheltered by the Atlantic winds, by the lawn forest here, the pine forest that's in the south. And there's little frost risk. This is a pretty warm appellation. It's like, it's like the Provence of the Médoc. No, not really. But I mean, it's warmer. There's less frost risk here. You have nice breezes, nice sunshine. It is lovely. Now, the terroir here, like I've already mentioned, you have gravel terraces, 6 to 33 meters or 20 to 108 feet. And what is here is there are some hills. So you are going up because there's streams here and they've made some hills over millennia, but you have large deposits of gravel. 6 different types of gravel exist if you go on the sublevel in the Médoc, and Margaux has all of them. There are also clay areas where you can plant that Merlot, clay and limestone, not clay and gravel. You've got pebbles and rocks, and you have all sorts of things that are going to make the soil incredibly poor. If you look at the soil up here, not great soil. So the thing about the soils is that they don't hold water. They are very, very poor. And that makes the vines struggle. They struggle to get nutrients. They dig down deep, and the gravel is going to reflect warmth and light and heat onto the vines, and you're going to get grape ripeness here. So that poor soil is fantastic. The only problem is that in times when there's no water during the growing season, these soils don't hold any water. So you're really in trouble if it's a dry season. Again, vintage matters, mesoclimate matters. It might not be great in a place where there's not a lot of clay, but it may turn out that up in Saint-Estèphe where there's more clay, it could go a little bit better for the vintage. Again, all very important. All right, if you have a Margaux, I am drinking the Chateau Latour de Mont. I did use the Corvin for this because it's such a baby. It's a 2018. So, you know, a little bit young. So as you look at it, it's a nice, rich color. Again, you know, mostly Cabernet Sauvignon, depending on your blend and what you have, it's going to be a little bit different. Give it a swirl and a sniff. I wrote in a either Instagram or Facebook before that, I mean, this smells heavenly, right? It smells like just, you know, a bunch of flowers and spices. It smells to me a little bit like orange. It's got some minerality to it. It has some very unique wines. However, what I want to say is that this is big. This is a big area with lots of diverse soil types. I've already said this like 400 times. I'm saying it 500 times now, or 401 times. So our wines are all going to differ, right? They're all going to differ because your chateau is dictating what is here, right? So give it a swirl. Sorry, I'm so in love with the smell. I won't even drink it. That's crazy. I need to drink it. Okay. So just so light and medium bodied, still with a tannic punch, right? So this is going to be great with food, but you get this woodsy note, this delicate note. It's supple and soft, right? This is not a heavy wine. I want to be clear. I've said this last time too. Médoc, Bordeaux in general, is not full bodied. When we think of full body, we really need to like make a new spectrum because Bordeaux is a medium bodied wine. Even the heavier wines still have a lightness of being about them. These wines have this kind of floral delicacy, some fruit, but really a little bit of earth. That tannin is there. That's what gives these wines great longevity. They're going to last and last and last. So really fantastic wines. Let me take any questions and then we'll move on to Moulis and Listrac. Heidi asks, is there a difference between Grand Cru Classé and Grand Cru Classé in 1855? No, it is the same thing. Just some people choose to put in 1855 and some people do not. So there we go. Michael, is $700 a bottle of Chateau Margaux worth it? I don't know because I've never had it. I won't spend that much and I don't have really rich friends. I will fess up there. I don't know, but I'm sure somebody here has. So somebody else answered that in the chat. Oh, hi, Natalia. How are you? I hope you're well. How old are the vines in Margaux? So there has been more replanting. And so we have, you know, since the 90s, we've seen some replanting. So we have 30 to 40-year-old vines in a lot of areas, and we have some areas that have been replanted, but we're not talking about 80-year-old vines, for instance. We're talking about things that are a little bit younger, but still 40-year-old vines, they've reached maturity, and that's how you're getting this depth of flavor and character and all of that. Molly, how long would you ideally wait to drink that wine? Ideally, I would wait at least 10 years to drink that wine. 2018 is a great vintage. It was nice and warm. It was really ideal in Margaux. I would like to see this wine soften a little bit, the tannin soften a little bit, because what's underneath it is just this really like pretty, you know, aromatic, violet scented. It almost is like an orange tea, I feel. And so I'm a little bit sad that I had that, you know, had to open it, but I mean, that's what's available right now in the market. So we'll take it. But, you know, again, if you've opened your wine and you are going to sit with it, this is again, part of, you know, I always say this about the classes, these wines develop, they change, they're living in the bottle. So it might not be, if you opened it today, that it's at its best. It may be best on, you know, on Saturday or Sunday. These wines need days and days. I will tell you, I mean, last week I had the Pauillac that I had last week. I just finished 2 days ago. It was even better. It was way better. So they get better and better. I usually, and of course, you know, again, many of your podcast listeners, so this is going to make sense to you. I usually will open a Bordeaux and then hide it because I have to hide it from MC Ice or else he'll drink the whole thing. So I hide it for like 2 days and then I will drink it after that. So there we go. All right. So that is Margaux. Let's move on to Moulis and Listrac. These are the two communes that I feel people know the least. And you need to know them. We all need to know them because it's really, really, especially if you want to get wines at a really great price that over deliver, this is where we're looking, these two communes in particular. So we'll start out with Moulis. These are two separate places, so we want to treat them separately. So Moulis, here, let me go up on the map so we see where the heck we are here. We are inland now, which is this orange strip here. Okay, we're just 3 kilometers or almost 2 miles away from the Gironde, and we're between the forest and the estuary here. The area is stretching really east to west. It's running about 7 kilometers east to west, and then about 4, just 4 miles. That's what that is. So halfway between Margaux and Saint Julien. It is the smallest appellation in the Médoc by land size, not by production, but by land size. The name comes, it means windmill, right? If you know Moulin à Vent in Beaujolais, that's the same thing. Moulis, this comes from Moulini. It's the Latin for water mill or windmill, and that's what was here. In many people's opinions, this is some of the best terroir that goes completely unrecognized and just sort of lopes along with nobody really paying enough attention. 610 hectares or 1,500 acres. That's 4% of the vineyard of the Médoc. We have 4.3 million bottles or 358,000 cases. Again, that's like a mid-sized brand at a big winery. Wine growers, we don't have any Grand Cru. There's no Grand Cru in 1855, but we do have 17 Cru Bourgeois, great wines, right? Yours may be one. I don't think mine is not, but you may have one. Okay, we have 1 Cru Artisan. We have a bunch of independent growers. We have a bunch of cooperatives here. The breakdown here is actually funny. It's like the Bizarro Margaux. It's 52% Merlot, right? We had 53% Cabernet. So it's sort of the reversal, and 40% Cabernet here, where we had the opposite of Merlot in Margaux. 4% Petit Verdot, 3% Cabernet Franc. Here we have more Merlot because we have soils that are suited to this. Now, the thing about Moulis, it's one of the oldest, if not the oldest area in the Médoc for vines. I mean, Roman estates were here. It has some elevation. So before the drainage happened, you did have people doing viticulture here. Vines were grown in the Middle Ages. We know that the clergy grew some stuff here. There's a nice Romanesque church in the middle of the town. Before the drainage, again, you had an ability to grow vines here. So there is this long, long legacy. And viticulture really started to take off in the 1700s, just like with everybody else. The area became very, very popular. More vines. It was traded in the UK. It was very popular there, which is always a good sign, right? Lots of trade, huge market. And the reputation of Moulis in the 1700s was fantastic. The problem came when, after phylloxera, 1870, 1894 around, we didn't see a lot of replanting here. It happened elsewhere, but not so much here. So you had a lot of vineyard land that was available that was not planted. Moulis now has, interestingly, I just read this in Jane Anson's Inside Bordeaux book, which is a fantastic book, and I love her. She's a good friend, and she just launched janeanson.com, by the way. She talks about how Moulis has a lot of future ahead of it, because whereas a lot of the communes have people leaving, populations leaving, there's a lot of young families and young people interested in moving to Moulis. So that's an interesting fact, because I know it seems like it's a kind of like stupid thing for me to say, but if you don't have people, you will not have an industry. So you do need people interested in the area, because some areas in wine and agriculture die because no one's interested in moving there. But here we're seeing some signs of life, which is great. Moulis is inland. So now you don't have fog and mist and issues with rot, but what you do have is more frost. The farther inland you go, the more frost risk you have. So they can have that issue sometimes in Moulis. It's a little bit warmer than Listrac, which we'll talk about in a second, and it is protected by the Atlantic winds, by the forest, and all of the other stuff. The terroir here, we're talking about, like I said, a little bit higher ground, woohoo, 20 to 30 meters. So 66 to 98 feet. We're not talking about, again, we talk about other places, we're talking about slopes, not in Bordeaux. This is kind of, it's rolling. There's a lot of different kinds of terroir. You have sandy gravel, you have some clay limestone. So that's going to be great for Merlot, which is why they grow mostly Merlot here. There's a plateau in the middle called the Grand Peugeot Plateau or Peugeot Plateau. And here you have gravel that has been brought down by the river. It's stony, and that's where you're going to see more Cabernet Sauvignon. On the clay limestone, you're going to see much more Merlot. And there are going to be 5 estates here that really make up the bulk of the production in Moulis, even though there are a lot of producers. So you will see Chasplain, you will see the Grand Peugeot, which I have, Chateau Peugeot here. I'm sure somebody else has this wine because it's pretty well distributed. Margaux, Mauvais Saint-Barthon. So a bunch of wine, properties take up most of the land. These wines, and we're going to taste it now, tend to be a little softer. They tend to be fuller bodied. They maybe don't age quite as well, but they do have a very beautiful, bouquet, and they're very, very fresh. They have a nice freshness about them. They're not heavy again. So look at the wine. It's kind of dark, right? It's a little bit dark in color. Mine's a little bit older. It's a 2015. So I'm seeing the age on this, and this is going to be it. I already opened it last night, so I know it's really good. Spin it around the glass, take a sniff. So mine smells like coffee and, dark fruit, and it almost smells a little bit like Christmas cake. You smell some of that barrel aging, the kind of dried fruit with nutmeg and cinnamon, things like that. Tasted a little bit of earth also. Oh, tonight, nice hit of licorice. If you like that, that's good. If not, you might not like that. Nice tannin, but still, again, totally different wine from last night where it was a little tighter. It's softening up. Great wine. If you have a hunk of cheese, that might be a good one to have with it. But these wines have more Merlot. They're a little softer, which is a good thing, right? For everyday drinking. And these wines are more affordable than what you're going to get in Margaux or Saint Julien, for instance. So Moulis has a slightly warmer climate. It has good drainage. It's got really high concentrations of gravel, and it's got a lot of potential. If you're looking for great value wine, look no further than Moulis, because it's sort of like between the commune, the 4 big communes, Margaux, Saint Julien, Pauillac, and Saint-Estèphe. It's kind of between that and the Médoc, Médoc, the regional appellations, but it's much better priced. And sometimes you can really hit a home run and get something great for the money. Shannon, the podcast about Margaux is Chateau Siron. Edouard Millet is his name. I don't know what number it is. I'm sorry. Hey, Donna. Donna's got a wine, the same wine I had a year older. Taste it next when. How do you decide when to open your bottles for another go? If you use the Coravin, when to, or if you have the bottle, you can check it. If it's good now, then you can drink it. We all, this is the whole thing about aging wine, is that everybody says that, and decanting and all of these things, it's not a science, right? It's what you like. You might like your wine a little bit more tannic than I do. I might want to see it mellow out a little bit. You might really like that. You might like that, kind of mouth drying feeling, and that is totally fine. So if it's drinking well now, drink it now. If you feel like you want to see its development, try it again in 6 months. That's what I would do. Try it every 6 months if you have a bunch of it. Mark, yes, Mark says he's had Margaux and it's worth every penny of the $700. Should you leave the bottle totally uncapped? You should not, because you don't want too much air getting in, and also, you don't want insects, as I call it, protein getting in. Just put the cork back in. You've already gotten air in it. It will kind of relax with time and the air. Shannon asked if you're keeping the wine over a few days, you put it in the fridge. It's up to you what you want to do. Always, for me, I've said this many times on the show and to you guys, that I prefer my reds a little bit cooler, even cooler than sometimes what's recommended. So I usually, even if I leave it out on the counter, I will put it in the fridge for like 30 minutes before I have it, just so that it tastes fresher and a little bit zippier. How does the lake influence things? Roy, I'm not sure which lake. You'll have to be more specific. Renee, after phylloxera and vineyards weren't replanted, when was it replanted? Well, after everybody started the replanting in the early 1900s. And the early 1900s were then, the effort kept going. It depends on, which area you're talking about. But some areas there was more interest than others, right? And of course, the famous chateau had names and they had built-in markets. So they had more money to reinvest. Some languished a bit, right? Okay, and Cru Bourgeois du Médoc shows only 4 for Moulis. Yep, you can go to medoc-bordeaux.com, and that has all of the most updated information. Okay, let's go to Listrac. Listrac is between Moulis and, here we go. It is between, oops, looks like my circle got a little, my circles had too much to drink. It slid over to the left here. All right, so Listrac is bigger than Moulis from a landmass size, but makes less wine. And this is another inland appellation between Margaux and Saint Julien. It is at the highest point. It is called the roof of the Médoc because it is a towering 43 meters or 141 feet. And it is farther from the temperature moderating influences of the Gironde. So now you are going to have some frost issues. You have the forest protecting you, but it is a little bit farther inland. So that's going to be a problem, but you've got some elevation, and these wines can be excellent value Merlot dominant wines. Now, the smallest production is here, but lately there's been some investment. So we see Chateau Clark being invested in by a member of the Rothschild family. The Rothschilds are an old French banking family who also own 2 first growths, Chateau Mouton Rothschild and Chateau Lafite Rothschild. And those are in Pauillac. They're very famous wines. And they also own a whole bunch of other properties. But this is a member of their family that decided to invest in Listrac. That's a really good sign. Also, the family that owns Hermes. So you can get your Birkin and some wine from Forca Hosen if you would like that. So yeah, so some investment going on here. So like I said, 1,945 acres or 787 hectares, 5% of the vineyards, 2.5 million bottles or only 208,300 cases. So the lowest level of production average year round. In terms of the wine growers, you have 14 Cru Bourgeois here. You have 1 Cru Artisan. You have a bunch of other growers here. The co-op though, the co-op is very, very important. The cooperative winemaking here. You have 29 wine growers that are part of that. Here we're going back to even more Merlot, 63.4% Merlot in Listrac, 30% Cabernet, 3.6% Petit Verdot, and then there's some Carmenere and some Cabernet Franc. There is more Merlot in Listrac. There is more appropriate soil types for that. But Listrac, the co-op, I want to get to the history here. We can talk about a lot of different things, right? Is to say that it was already famous in the 17 and 1800s here. But what happened with Listrac is they made a decision during the Depression that they were so strapped and things were so tough that they decided that they were going to form a co-op, right? So this co-op had about 25 members. They all got together, they pooled their wine, and they managed to get a contract with the Railway of France. And in so doing, they had a steady source of income and the wines went out. The problem is, when was the last time you looked at the brand that was being served on a train? Unless it's like the premium or plain or anything else, whatever our equivalent is now. We don't really look at that stuff. It's the house wine, and that was Listrac. In the background, while they were having this, having this 1/3 of their production go off to the railway system, and they were doing well, they missed out on one of the major developments of the current era of, post World War II, which is that negociants rule the day, right? And there is a whole, business system for selling wine in Bordeaux. It goes through the Place de Bordeaux, and the wine, the prices are set, and you deal with negociants who then, and courtiers who then set prices and do negotiations, and then you ship your wine abroad. Well, Listrac really didn't have a lot of that because 1/3 of its wine was spoken for. So it was a bit of an anonymous wine. It got its appellation, its communal appellation, in 1957, not too much later, by the way, than Margaux. And then at that point, it was but incidentally 20 years after Moulis. And at that point, they added the word Médoc, as Moulis did. I forgot to mention that. They added the word Médoc so that people would know where they were, because these are the less famous communes. We still call them Moulis, but it's technically Moulis and Médoc, or Listrac-Medoc. Why? So that you know that it's part of the Médoc. Now, Margaux doesn't need to do that, neither does Saint Julien, but these communes were a little bit more obscure. So you still see that today. There has been so much reinvestment in these vineyards. There are a lot of smallholders here, though, so it's a little bit more difficult. This is the latest ripening of all of the communes. Okay, we have proximity to the forest. We have slow, even ripening in good years when there's not frost. Cabernet Sauvignon has a very difficult time ripening, or did traditionally, at least, right? Climate change has been very good for Listrac. Although we see a lot of Merlot here, could we see more Cabernet in the future if things heat up? This could be a Cabernet hotbed. They still do have some gravel soils. The problem was traditionally it was too cold to really ripen it. So the reputation of Listrac has been, oh, it's so green, the flavors are so harsh. Not really anymore, because they've moved to Merlot. But could we change back to Cabernet? Who knows, right? Climate change is a many splendored thing. Not really, but it can help. It definitely has helped with ripeness levels in Listrac. So again, we're at the roof of the Médoc, raise the roof, right? The soils are quite shallow here, so the roots don't dig as deep, so you don't have the real complexity. You have less consistency because there is a lot of diversity of soil types. So you have some of that gravel from the Pyrenees that's great for Cabernet. You have some of the Garonne gravel, but mostly there's a plateau of clay and limestone, not clay and gravel, but clay and limestone, like I mentioned in Moulis as well. That plateau is awesome for Merlot. That's why we have 63% of the wines being grown, or the grapes being grown here, Merlot, because that plateau is going to really be great for growing this grape and making some really nice flavors, right? So the focus on terroir, of getting rid of some of the Cabernet, of working on understanding that maybe it's not warm enough in certain sites to ripen, has only improved the quality of Listrac. We will taste it, and then I will tell you one thing about Moulis and Listrac, and we can debate it at a future point in time, or here if you want. Okay, let's take a look at this wine. It is so affordable. I mean, my goodness, like Listrac is really such a great value often. A nice dark color, right? Can't really see your hands through it. Nice thick legs. Let me see what my alcohol levels are here. 13%, so not too high. Spin it around the glass and take a sniff. So that to me is richer than the Moulis. It smells like herbs. It smells like thyme, like sauteed sage and things like that. Some black fruit, blackberry too. Take a sip. Good tannin, but that effect of the Merlot is definitely there. And again, it tastes like what it smells like. To me, this is like sauteed herbs. Nice tannin, good acidity, right? So it's fresh, not too heavy. Again, none of these wines are really very heavy. And we just have a nice sort of, this wine you could imagine going, you could have it with hamburgers, or you could have it with portobello mushrooms. All of these wines go really well with mushrooms and those kinds of, earthy food that we are heading into for fall. These wines are perfect for fall. really the tannin can stick to meat, it can stick to protein. They're great with cheeses. So again, really lovely. Now the Chateau Fourcade du Pré, this wine is mostly actually more Cabernet Sauvignon than most. It's half, about 47% Cabernet, 47% Merlot. 80% of the vineyards are on gravel. Interesting, a little atypical for the area, but still very high quality. And what's actually interesting about this place is that they sell 1/3 of their vintage outside of the negociant system. So again, kind of forward looking, which is very interesting. Now, there has been some talk about Moulis absorbing Listrac. Why does Listrac make so little wine? Listrac is bigger than Moulis. Shouldn't they make more wine? They could. The problem is that they don't get the money for it. So instead, they put the appellation Au Médoc on it. If they put it on that, then they feel that they can sell it more easily. And so we're seeing fewer and fewer producers using Listrac, which is a real shame. Moulis has considered making a Grand Moulis appellation, which Listrac producers could use. And that, unfortunately, would probably see fewer and fewer producers using the Listrac appellation. I personally don't think that's a good thing. I think that they should continue and improve and change. And they are different enough that they do deserve a separate appellation. If you've tasted these two wines side by side, or if you could in the future, you'll see that they are different. But it would be a shame. So we'll see what happens with that. That's a development to watch. They only review the appellations about every 10 years. So they're not quite up to that, but there definitely has been talk about that. We'll see. All right, let me check questions one more time, and then we are going to head to Saint Julien. There's a body of water showing as bordering the AOC on your map. I think you're talking about the Atlantic, Roy. Over here. Yeah, that has those, right. These lakes they don't have any effect really on they're very far away. They don't have any effect on the climate of the Médoc. There's a big forest in between here. So that's going to stop that influence, but I see what you're saying. Okay. So Saint Julien, considered by most as being the most consistent of all of the wines of the Médoc. Here we go. And it is right here. It borders Pauillac. It is bordered by the Gironde. There's Au Médoc all around it. And it's about 2 miles wide, or 3.5 kilometers wide, 5.5 kilometers or 3.5 miles long. And it is known for subtlety, balance, the most balanced of all the wines, Cabernet Sauvignon based. It is the smallest appellation of the 4 main communes. And because of that, the terroir is rather homogeneous, okay? Rigorous selection of grapes. They are very, very quality conscious here. And although they don't have as many 1855 Cru Classé as Margaux, they have a huge concentration of them, meaning there are a bunch all in one spot. The commune of Saint Julien Béchevel is divided into 2 areas. So you have the stuff around the river, and that is going to be on the Pauillac border. These are, you might have heard of Léoville-la-Casse or Léoville-Poiferré or Barton, Léoville-Barton. These are very famed wines. These tend to be on the river sides. And then you have the southern group, things that are in the southern group near Béchevel. And there's a bunch of famous wines there. So there are not any first growths in the 1855 classification in Saint Julien. And because of that, it may be that it has less status or fewer people know about it. That does not mean that it is not fantastic. So this area, again, it's bigger than Listrac and Moulis. It's about 2,200 acres or 910 hectares, 6% of the Médoc vineyards. And you have 6.2 million bottles, which is about 515,000 cases of wine. Again, a little bit more wine than what we just saw in the other 2 communes. 19 wine growers, 11 are in that 1855 classification. We have a lot of second growths, a lot of fourth growths, no first growths. Again, one cru artisan. We have some independents, and the largest cru classé, Chateau Lagrange, is actually in Saint Julien. 65% Cabernet Sauvignon. That's a huge percentage, right? 28% Merlot. Cabernet Franc is at 4%. Petit Verdot is at 3%. It's actually the reverse of Listrac, right? Listrac has those proportions, except with Merlot as the lead and Cabernet as the second grape. Saint Julien, since the 13th century, has been established again with the drainage that really helped the wine, and it helped the area. And around the villages of Bechevel and Saint Julien, we have large estates. And what we're seeing here is a shrinking number of estates, not because people are going out of business, but because the larger estates are buying up smaller estates or buying up land, and we are seeing more and more consolidation. What that means for Saint Julien and for us, unfortunately, is that if we cannot afford to buy Léoville-Lacasse or any of the others that I mentioned, then we're in an unfortunate position where there are fewer and fewer options of some of those smaller producers. Whereas in Margaux, you do have a lot more independent producers where you can get these wines. So Cru Bourgeois, or even outside of the Cru Bourgeois, we're not seeing that as much with Saint Julien. But in a nod to history, actually, Saint Julien is the only place where the same owners that owned the chateau in 1855, still not the same family, not the same owners. That would be a Rip Van Winkle situation. We do not have that here. We have Langoa Barton and Léoville Barton, and that is an Irish family. Actually, a bunch of Irish merchants owned. That's the Barton family, right? So if you are Irish, you can be proud of your heritage. Drink Bordeaux proudly. There's Irish, there's Scottish, there's English. So many different cultures, so many different families have moved in and taken over. There's Japanese ownership, there's Chinese ownership, there's Filipino ownership. It is such a diverse and worldly place. It is such a wonderful melting pot of international ownership, and it really does add to the flavor of Bordeaux. Anyway, Saint Julien. So Saint Julien has less rainfall. The estates near the Gironde are going to get that moderating climate, right? A little bit warmer, less frost prone. As you move away from the Gironde, you're going to have more problems with frost, but also that natural air conditioning coming in off the Gironde, off the Atlantic. All of that blowing in is going to allow the vines, it's going to prevent them from becoming too ripe, right? Overripe is not good either. The estates that are a little bit farther away, that's going to be a bit more of a problem because it can get very cold or very hot. Again, the farther inland you go, that's always the case. The continental climate takes over. It is similar to Pauillac, like we discussed last time. The difference is that it is so consistent. 75% of what is here is gravel, and it is very homogeneous. So not very high, 75 feet or 23 meters is our high point here, our ceiling. We're not at the roof like we were in Listrac. The best terroir are near the Gironde. You have some slopes there with good drainage, right? Drainage is always important. You've got to drain. Grapes don't like wet feet. They don't like to have the wet roots. So draining off is important. And you have these mounds of Gironde gravel that are not as deep as Pauillac, but they are really amazing and sort of littered with different sizes of rocks and stones. And they don't have as much clay. So it is really straight up gravel here with just a little bit of sand, but pretty much, like I said, only 25% is not gravel here. Those southern areas have a little bit more limestone. Saint Julien, if we want to taste it, it is just known for harmonious, restrained, not over the top flavors. It is not over the top in tannin. It is known to be balanced and just have perfect harmony. Black fruit, tobacco, cedar, all of that. So take a look at it. Again, maybe a little bit darker than the Listrac because it's going to have more, I'm just checking out my alcohol, 15% alcohol. Woo, that's a lot for this 2019. Okay, so super dark. You can see it, definitely looking at the legs, right? As they drip down, that's the indication of alcohol, the Margaux effect. The water drips down first, and what's left is unfermentable sugars and alcohol. So that's on the side of the glass. That's a good party trick. You want to know how much alcohol is in it, just look at the legs. All right, take a sniff. Wowza. Okay, so this is smelling a lot more like tobacco. It smells like leather. It's got those cedar notes to it, stronger, really strong earth notes. So different from the Margaux. And we're just a little bit down the road, right down the river. Take a sip. Stunning. Absolutely stunning. So I have the Chateau Lalande, which actually used to be part of Chateau Lagrange until it was sold off. This piece of it was sold off. And just a lovely wine. The tannin hits you a little bit afterwards. Again, would be better with food, but lots of that tobacco, leather, kind of earthy, almost a, mushroomy note to it. Very, very layered. And the more sips you take of these wines, and like I said, the longer you sit with them, the more complexity they gather. That's just the nature of Medoc. It's the nature of these communes. It's not a pop and pour wine, right? These wines tend to be wines that need a little bit of time, not just in a decanter, but like I said, pop it open, put the cork back in, and hide it from whomever your MC Ice is so that they don't get to it. These wines are so well esteemed and so balanced. And I think Saint Julien, unfortunately, like I said, it's becoming less and less in our reach, but they are worth it. And for $40, again, not cheap, but that's how much I paid for this wine. It's a delicious wine to hold, to age, to check on every, so often. If you get a little bit of extra money and you can spend that, it's one that you can hold on to. And for $40, it's worth it. Same with the Margaux. Mine was also $40. Really a fantastic, fantastic wine. Let me check the questions. Okay. I am going to wrap this up now, unless anybody has any other questions. I can't get to the chat because there's a lot there. I think Beth, thank you, Beth, so much. I think you answered a lot of questions here. But the wrap up here of the Medoc and of these communes and of the stories behind these wines. And, I'm not much of like I'm not a storyteller. I don't consider myself to be that. I consider myself more to try to have a relationship with these bottles. And I would recommend, I know that sounds very, very strange, but each of these places, all of the places in the Medoc are just made of farmers. Some of them have pretty chateau, but in the end of the day, the people behind it are farming, and farming is challenging here, and they are working the land. I mean, 20% of Margaux is organically farmed, the highest percentage in all of the Medoc, and they're all working towards sustainability. They're all working towards going back to a time when the land was respected. We need to take a different view of the Medoc. The idea that the Medoc is fancy chateau and for people smoking cigars, which would just ruin the wine. So why would you do that, right? You want to taste all these beautiful, subtle flavors. These ideas that the wine is not for us as normal people is not correct. These wines are spectacular. They're diverse, right? You can have a Medoc wine and you can get it for 10 or 15 US dollars, and you can have it with dinner, and you can have it with cheese, and you can just sip on it. And there's not a whole lot of stress. It's grapes that it has more complexity. It is a great value. Then you can have a wine that is so complex, that has so much going on. And yes, those are going to cost you more, but you will have, the more you drink the Medoc, the more you understand the differences between these. It doesn't have to be a wine for somebody else. It can be something for you. And also, you don't have to love one wine more than the other. You don't have to say, I only like blah or this. Each of these wines has a separate reason for being almost, right? So there is so much here. You could just spend, I feel like I could spend the rest of my life only drinking wines from the Medoc and still be excited and interested. You know, there's so much here. Hopefully, they will add whites to the mix. I'm kind of hoping for that because that would be really exciting to have things that are wines of terroir. The problem with it just being Bordeaux, AOC, Bordeaux Superior, is that you don't have the specific differences. You can guess based on the chateau and who's making them, but it would be better if they could at least delimit it as Medoc versus something else. But in any case, these wines are wines that you're going to practice with, that you're going to try, that you're going to sit with, that you're going to experiment with. They are not anything to be afraid of. They're not anything not to have. They should be in your repertoire. They are delicious. And if you have them tonight and you've never had them before, try them with food. They only improve. These wines are made to go with food. And also the perception that, you know, they're big and brawny and all that kind of stuff. It's just not true. So again, the Medoc, to me, I mean, it's such a revelation. It really has been, for me, like discovering the wines of the Medoc, all of the different, you know, characters and all of the different stories about each of the wines, the times that you could have them, the flavors that they present. They are so complex. They're so wonderful. So I hope that these two classes gave you a good idea of what this region has to offer. I hope that you are excited to go out and try and buy these wines. I hope you understand that they are for normal people, they are for us, and that they're nothing to be intimidated by. They are something to go out and try with reckless abandon. I mean, they are great. It's really rare these days with all the quality that you're going to get something bad. So I appreciate you all being here. Thank you to the Vins du Médoc for allowing us to do this class, allowing me to teach you about this. I really appreciate it. They sponsored this and paid for it. So we really have to thank them. Medoc-Bordeaux.com if you want more information. I appreciate you so much. Thank you. Good night.